Alrighty, everyone, welcome back. This is another episode of the Wacky World of Energy being recorded on the 16th. Now, I've just got my breakfast in me, so I hope I'm not too groggy with it, but I'm pretty excited about these stories. I mean, Anthony, we're not oracles, are we? We're just reading the news, making good predictions, and they're coming to fruition, right?
Yeah. It's amazing what a little bit of observation can do, right? And you just observe obvious things in a lot of cases, but you're out there, you're the one actually seeking the information. You're not just sitting back and letting somebody tell you everything, right? So it can make you look smarter than you actually are, right? And so where we're going with this is, golly, what was it? A couple weeks ago?
Yeah,
month
2 or
ago?
3 maybe.
Whenever we had our episode about the Biden administration was going to increase the royalties on federal leases, yeah? Yeah. They were going to increase them from 12.5% to 18.75%. It's basically a 50% hike in your top line the government's taking, right? And one of the things we kind of talked about is, it's hard to think there's going to be a lot of industry interest for that.
It's tough to justify, especially right now. I mean, some people are hedged in at positions even lower. There's not a lot of free cash to go around, even with high commodity prices, but this was just not a deal they wanted to bite on.
Geez. We have this article that comes out. And this article that comes out, we actually found a couple days after our last recording. And so this article is dated May 11th, 2022 from Axios. And the title is, Biden administration cancels 3 major offshore oil lease sales. Cancels. Well, it doesn't take much digging into the article here. We just go down a little bit here. You know, the Interior Department announced Wednesday. So this would have been Wednesday of last week. This would have been just a day or two after our last recording, I believe. Maybe the week before. Either way, it was this month. That it won't proceed with plans for 3 oil and gas lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska's Cook Inlet in federal waters here. So, they have this thing in here, why it matters, the move that all but ends the likelihood the U.S. government selling new drilling leases in coastal waters in 2022 comes as gasoline. This is a consumer-facing article. Prices hit all-time highs. Yeah, it's another win for environmental groups. We ought to call them the pro-Russian group right now.
Yeah, it's all about how you frame it, but this is what we said. Bottom line, you're right.
Yeah,
cutting more out. People didn't want in. Lack of industry interest in leasing.
There we go. Boom. Driving the news. The Interior Department said in an emailed statement, so they wrote this down too, that, quote, due to lack of industry interest in leasing the area. Gee, I wonder why there was lack of industry interest in federal leasing.
Yeah, this was just that's a bureaucratic way of saying this deal sucked.
Well, they see one lease that was sold in the Gulf of Mexico months ago, and a federal judge basically threw it out. Oh, they didn't do enough research on climate impact. Blah. Yeah. Oh, nobody wants to do business. If you're in the industry, if you are in the industry of energy industry, oil and gas, why do you want to do business with the federal government by choice right now? They're hostile to what you do, right? They're changing the rules on you. I mean, you can even get it through the Department of the Interior, and then the federal judge might throw it out. And so, I wonder why there's lack of industry interest when on top of all that stuff, you also said that the royalties are going to go up 50%. Now, I'm not 100% sure if these leases that were put out there were subject to the new leasing royalty rates, but it seems as if it's very likely. And all they want to say is due to lack of industry interest. So the Department of Interior is what? Wanting to throw our industry under the bus for not wanting to go, oh, it's not our fault. The industry just didn't want to do it. We gave them the opportunity.
Right.
Gave me the opportunity to what? Drive into a tree?
Yeah, it's a foolish argument.
Oh, come on, man. I don't want to do things that I just don't perceive as going to be good trajectory. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah,
and it's not. Yeah.
there's two options. You've got work with the federal government, work with these lease rates, or do things privately, where it's probably going to be honestly easier to get through working with people who are excited to work versus
Yeah.
people who are trying to put up line after line of red tape to prevent you from doing exactly what you want to do.
Yeah.
When you frame it like that, yeah, of course there was a, quote, lack of industry interest.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a spokesperson here in this article to finish it up, um, from the American Petroleum Institute in an emailed statement saying, unfortunately, this is becoming a pattern. The administration talks about the need for more supply and acts to restrict it. I have to agree with him here. I just do. Quote, as geopolitical volatility and global energy prices continue to rise, we again urge the administration to end the uncertainty and immediately act on a new 5-year program for federal offshore leasing. I just don't see them doing it.
They're not
Right.
going to, probably.
Right. So, all this in the backdrop of moving on to our next article. Tavis, I would like you to tee this one up. The OPEC Plus production target.
Oh, of course. So that last article we talked about stands in stark contrast to these next couple that we have because, as you know, commodity prices, commodity supply is getting even tighter. We need all we can get right now, so it's not exactly great to read the headline, OPEC Plus misses production target by a whopping 2.7 million barrels per day. And
Woo!
yeah, that's nothing small. We're not 150,000 barrels shy. We are in the millions now, and I think I wrote an article last week. I'll go ahead and link it right here. But we talked about there's lots of people who could step up to the plate and really take care of production, but they've all got their problems, whether it's Libya dealing with their force majeure or Iran navigating a new nuclear deal. Yeah, we have all these resources that we are ready to produce, but for whatever reason, people can't quite get to it.
This article from Dayton
Oh, yeah.
source.
So this article is from Oil Price. It was written May 12th, 2022, and we'll take a look at the body here. The top 3 OPEC producers, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the UAE, saw the highest increases in their respective oil production last month, while output in Libya plunged by 161,000 barrels per day to below 1 million barrels per day at 913,000. So even when small incremental gains are being made by your big boys, your Saudi Arabia, your UAE, you've got other countries losing more and more of their capacity, their base load.
Well, and the other thing too that I would like to point out. Okay, so we have issues with Libya and oil production and other OPEC countries. And newsflash, everybody, there's always been issues with a handful of OPEC countries,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Civil wars, fighting,
Nukes.
insurrection movements, rebels backed from other countries. I mean, this is nothing new. This isn't a new cadence. Like, all of a sudden, OPEC nations aren't the most stable politically. Wow, no.
No, geopolitical tension is the expectation.
Yeah, the difference this time around is that all the smaller OPEC nations and all the general not that out of the norm level of, I guess, political volatility within the OPEC countries, as far as, how they're dealing with things within their own borders and blah, 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 that's kind of been around. But that doesn't lead you to miss by 2.7 million barrels a day. Well, how do you miss by 2.7 million barrels a day?
Yeah, that's not just a miss. That's not an oopsie. That's a big,
That's a
we have
whiff.
a problem.
Oh, God. Well, and we talked about this internally at Rare Petro even 2 years ago, during when COVID was going. Yes, there was demand destruction, and yes, it happened overnight. Why? Because people were genuinely afraid overnight, literally overnight, stopped driving. The roads went empty. I mean, the 405 was empty. It looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie or something. So that hasn't happened since. But when you have a planet that is always using approximately 100 million barrels a day, and overnight, almost, a good chunk of the world says, oh my God, I'm afraid I'm just going to sit in my house for a couple of days or a week or two and see what's up. Yeah, that's going to overflow tanks and overflow supply reservoirs and floating storage real quick and drive the prices into the basement.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff, no matter all the lockdowns and everything that happened since, that has, yes, had some impact on energy demand, But that was that first out of the gate. Everybody was afraid. Boom, nobody went anywhere. Okay? That's what made everything flow over. Well, then, essentially, though, we're 2 years later now, and we've had lack of investment in the oil and gas industry in by and large since around 2015 when there was the price war. Saudi Arabia tried to flood the gates and kill oil in the United States that drives down the prices. I mean, you're looking the summer 2014, oil's around $100 a barrel, and come the following February, oil is down under 40 or 50. Big drop. And then we just kind of hang out in this lull in the industry for years, even before COVID. I'm like, oh, it wasn't, there wasn't a bunch of CapEx going on compared to before 2015. And then you have the grand finale after years from 2015 until 2020 of underinvestment. Then you have this COVID demand destruction thing going on, and it even stoked that even more. And then we were bought time as a planet to just kind of work off the excess inventories from those initial global, oh man, what's going on? I don't want to move anywhere. And now now the chickens are coming home to roost, okay? Now we're seeing that these countries, I mean, when OPEC announced their production targets, it was a phased reintroduction of oil production every month of around 400,000 barrels a day for a year and a half or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they've missed, I think, 6 or 7 months in a row. Missed as in their production was under what they could have produced.
Yeah, it wasn't even close.
And the gap every month on trend seems to be getting wider.
Yep.
First it was 103% compliance. Then it was 105% compliance. Then it was 116% compliance. And the higher the number, the lower their production compared to their target in this what I'm talking about here. So this is continuing to get bigger. Yeah. And at the end of the day, the only thing that changes this problem is long-term plans to develop more. And, Europe's scrambling just to mainly immediately backfilling the energy sources that they have been getting from Russia in part or entirely. And you have us in the United States saying, we're going to help Russia and supply all this stuff. And I don't know, we're not really all that crazy about developing a bunch here.
So where's
I mean,
it coming from?
I mean, you've got even the CEO of Pioneer Resources some months back, pretty large U.S. shale player, said, I don't care if oil is $200 a barrel. We're going 5% this year. They want to drill up all their inventory, right? So we have a growing by the month supply and demand gap. And what's happening here is that the supply just can't keep up with the demand. Even if the demand is not rising currently because of China lockdowns, and that kind of leads to our next article, another oil price article, May 16th, 2022. This is actually the day of our recording this week. Here's the headline. China's oil demand may rebound if Shanghai reopens in June. As of June 1st, Shanghai authorities are set to allow broad reopening with gradual increases in domestic flights. China's zero COVID policies have been weighing on global oil demand. So here we have oil still sitting around over $100 a barrel. And yeah, a lot of this is because of the uncertainty from Russia coming into the Ukraine. But oil was heading to $100 a barrel, everybody, before that started.
Easily.
What that did was it just accelerated oil to pop over $100 for the first time in many years. Okay? I mean, you can just look up the oil price graph anywhere. I mean, it's all over the place. Go anywhere you want. Google it, search it, whatever. It's all over the place. I mean, oil prices were going up anyway. All right. This whole thing started in late February with the Ukraine thing. All right. And oil prices before that actually kicked off were still over $90. And they were trending higher anyway. And so with all of this, OPEC can't make their production. People don't want to develop more, at least with federal assistance. Although we talked about before in the United States, federal lands as a percentage aggregate of macro U.S. oil production is a fairly small percentage. It's still another weight, isn't it? That we just can't get extra oil out there real quick,
Oh yeah. Even China
So,
right now, their setup is best case scenario. I mean, a country of 1.5 billion people, Shanghai itself,
ugh,
29 million, some form or another, lots of those people are restricted or in lockdowns, forcefully even. You lift that ban up, you let people get out and go back to what they're doing, that's only going to further stress those shortages. I mean, I'm not particularly, well, I'm excited to see how high the price can go, but it does come at the cost of hurting pretty much every consumer because energy is going to be a feedstock for whatever we produce. So I think
mm-hmm,
China is going to put more strain on it. Come June 1st,
mm-hmm,
rest of that month, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw gas back above $8, maybe 9, especially through these heat waves. Oh, well, I'm getting ahead of myself there, but this China situation is really best case scenario right now. I hate to say
yeah,
that.
yeah, and to put some quantification on this, I mean, OPEC, the same in going on in the article here. OPEC's second quarter 2022 demand estimate was revised down by a massive 670,000 barrels a day to 98.44 million barrels per day. That's global demand estimate that OPEC put out there due to the China's lockdowns. Okay.
Mm.
Um, but the average global oil demand is set, this continues, to exceed the 100 million barrel per day mark in the third and fourth quarters, with Q4 demand seen at 102.64 million barrels per day, per the cartel's latest monthly oil market report, MOMR. At the start of the second quarter, in April, Chinese refiners slashed crude processing by 11% annually due to weak demand. So it was now that 12.61 million barrels per day last month, and it was its lowest since March of 2020, and compares to 13.8 million barrels a day in March of 2022 and 14.09 million barrels a day in April of 2021. So what they're trying to frame up here is basically Chinese refining throughput, oil demand for import to process or whatever through the refiners dropped by over 1 million barrels a day due to their lockdowns
Mm.
compared to where it probably should have been. We're still in a situation though where OPEC misses their target by 2.7 million barrels a day.
While China's looking to consume 2.7 more million barrels of oil themselves, or
I
2
mean,
million.
possibly, what my point is here is that yes, the Chinese lockdowns have had an impact to global oil demands to some degree, but less than 2 million barrels a day, according to this analysis in this article here from Oil Price, that whatever they're citing, it was OPEC's report, right? Um, and I would point out here that nobody really knows exactly what the oil demand is going to be in a quarter or two. But what they're trying to do is project that, okay, oil demand was at a certain level, then China locked down Shanghai and all their big cities, zero COVID policy, blah, blah, blah. And they have a pretty good estimate as to how much China has reduced their, how much oil they're bringing in for refining. But again, at the same time, we have OPEC missing by 2.7 million barrels a day.
Mm.
And what I have yet to see, and would be shocked if it was a downward estimate, is if India is able to get their crude at a $30 to $40 discount per barrel, they're probably putting through a little bit more. They're probably not doing less than they were last year
Mm.
or the year before, because they're trying to take advantage of prices where they are due to a very unique geopolitical situation with Russia and Ukraine and all this, and the Russian crude kind of being radioactive, if you will, from a financial concept. So yeah, I mean, we have a continuing situation here where, and of course, U.S. inventories continue to go down. Distillate inventories are at 17-year lows. We'll
Mm.
see what this week's report has to say. Uh, but yeah, I mean, so yes, China, to just kind of frame this up, so we'll move on. Yes, the lockdowns in China have weighed on global oil demand, but OPEC's misses are bigger.
Mm.
And everything from any major oil industry producer, you got the top three in the world are the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. And I think that's the order that they're currently in. The United States, from a government aspect, isn't exactly doing a lot in reality to help get more production. From a private market aspect, um, you also have this backdrop of a bunch of shareholders just wanting returns, a bunch of debt being bought down, this and that, not nearly the pace of drilling activity. I mean, you can plot U.S. onshore rig count versus oil prices, and I'll tell you right now, if you only looked at rig count, you wouldn't think oil is at $100 a barrel right
Oh,
now.
no, of course not.
Yeah. So, and then you've got Saudi Arabia. Well, they're obviously having a harder time getting excess on the market, and they're using this whole we see demand destruction as we just don't really want to put a whole lot. I mean, it's their report, it's OPEC's report. There's demand destruction, so that's another reason for them to say we're not going to put more oil on the market right now because we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. And then you've got Russia. Well, Russia's another big producer, and we all know what's going on with that, right? We have their crude largely being just trying. People are trying to avoid it, although it's still making its way into global supplies. It's just doing it at a discount, right? So it's a very interesting oil situation we have politically, geopolitically, macro. All these things is just very, financial system too. It's teeing up for. I mean, it's hard to see oil prices. Energy demand does not seem to be going any direction as far as the inventories are concerned.
Yeah.
The demand seems to be outpacing supply and has been so on trend for about a year and a half.
Oh, yeah. Any way you cut it, demand is going to be back to 2019 levels soon, and we do not have a whole lot of infrastructure looking to supply back to what we were in 2019.
And so, never worry though. The government's here to help. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, man, yeah, if they know that there's going to be this, I think anybody really follows this at all, even government, whether they speak out in favor or opposition of the oil and gas industry, I think a lot of people, at least a critical mass of people, understand. Yeah, no, supplies are getting down. Energy is going to become a little more volatile. A little, it's going to create other problems. So now we have states.
Yeah, we're bringing it back home, and our next couple of articles are talking about
conserving energy. Yeah, Tavis,
yeah.
What's this next one for
that's
Texas?
the idea. So this is an article from Yahoo.com. I don't know if we've used Yahoo yet, but they did a short, sweet, succinct little article titled "Texans Urge to Conserve Energy After Heatwave Knocks Power Plants Offline," and this was released by a Joshua Espinoza on the 14th, last Saturday. I'm sure some of you have heard about this, but I'll just read directly from the article because they put it well. The Electric Reliability Council of Texas, as we know, ERCOT, manages most of the state's main electrical grid. They made the request Friday after rising temperatures caused a drastic spike in power demand. The organization said the demand was so high that it caused 6 power facilities to go offline unexpectedly. According to CNN, the plant failures resulted in a loss of about 2,900 megawatts of generation, enough electricity to power roughly 580,000 homes. So already we've got, I'm going to guess almost somewhere between 1.5 to 2 million people without power because it's too hot. And it's a shame, especially after for those of you who may not remember, last February, scroll to the bottom, they talk about it. ERCOT's request comes more than a year after a winter storm caused statewide power outages. The crisis resulted in more than 200 deaths, most of which were linked to hypothermia. So we just don't have the baseload power supply for some reason, despite all of these energy resources, especially in Texas, and it's leading to archaic forms of death, dying to the elements, something that should have been left in the early 1900s once we established this energy infrastructure to heat our homes so we could live in Aspen, or cool our homes so we could live in the southern United States. And quite frankly, it's upsetting because last year the argument was, oh, the grid's not winterized. And this year, it wasn't winter, it was summer. And we're seeing so many people being hurt.
Yeah.
And I don't want a hospital to have a power outage should something like this happen. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, going on here, CNN reports the temperatures in Texas to reach the 90s.
Oh, man, 90 degrees? That's
They
what put the
say,
strain on this?
I
Good
guess, they
God.
say roughly 10 to 15 degrees above average
Mm-hmm.
for this time of year. Okay. I mean, essentially, what they're trying to do here, yes, it does get hotter, but they're talking about how May is considered a shoulder month. This is from the article, a time of the year where generation facilities intentionally go offline so the team can perform necessary maintenance before the summer season. So they know that the summers are going to be really hard on the utility systems and the winters, but the spring should be more mild. It's a good time to, you're thinking you don't need to have as much capacity potentially online for demand. So it's a good time to do work. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's true. But I just keep seeing that we have more and more utility. I mean, we have, what's our next article for California here, Tavis?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, California to spend $5.2 billion on electricity reserve to avoid blackouts. This is from May 13th. California has proposed spending $5.2 billion on creating, I love the names these guys always come up with, a quote, strategic electricity reliability reserve that would help the state avoid blackouts. I know what a good energy reserve is. It's called a gas reservoir.
Yeah, big old cavern of natural gas ready to use when you need it.
Yeah. But don't you worry, the government's here to help. California is also set to retire 6,000 megawatts of nuclear and gas-fired energy production. Oh my
That's the part that
God.
blows my mind. So we're spending money to build energy infrastructure while we simultaneously decommission energy infrastructure in a state that has, in very recent history, struggled, especially through wildfire season, to provide energy for its people. A state of rolling blackouts. This is the plan?
Yeah.
Bit upsetting,
So
ain't it?
the new budget calls for funds for the purpose of, quote, climate resilience and integrated climate equity and economic opportunity across the state's budget to mobilize a coordinated all of government response to the climate crisis. Guys, you have an energy supply crisis.
Yeah, climate resilience, 90-degree weather rolling through early?
Your problem at hand is energy supply to your people.
Mm-hmm.
And your solution is to blame the climate boogeyman and then justify shutting down 6,000 megawatts of reliable, in place, currently, nuclear and natural gas generation facilities for electricity. At least they say in the article, but renewables in California's electricity exports have also stressed the grid. The reserve will now be developed to use existing generation capacity that was scheduled to retire. New generation, new storage projects, clean backup generation projects, customer side load reduction capacity that is visible and dispatchable by California during grid emergencies, and diesel and natural gas backup generation projects, which the budget document stressed would have emission controls in all required permits. Of note, there were two items in that list: existing generation capacity that was scheduled to retire, and diesel and natural gas backup generation projects. So maybe they're going to pump the brakes a little bit on retiring some of their energy generation capacity, yeah?
I hope. That seems to make the most sense here. If you're short on energy, let's not decommission facilities.
This is a very short article. We've pretty much read the whole thing already.
Yeah.
They're trying to address issues, and they're using the climate situation as the reason for the issues. But when it really comes down to it, it sounds as if, again, that the items on the list that they're going to include for their strategic electricity reliability reserve were, quote, existing generation capacity that was scheduled to retire and diesel and natural gas backup generation project.
It's a good start, but still, it seems like spending money for no reason. What are we taking these facilities offline, bringing them back online? The costs are being passed down, and I was on my first tour of duty in Bakersfield, right? We'll call it that. And I was talking to a homeowner who said, yeah, they've adjusted electricity rates, so the solar panels on my house that would have provided a return on investment will not, because at this point, he's getting not as much money back for the solar panels. So these economic these studies, you go, oh, cool. In 20 years, it will have paid for itself. But the rates of electricity keep going up because of these shortages, and you've essentially, I don't know, added value to your home, I guess, according to who you're selling to.
It's a statistical nightmare. These governments, they do these programs. They pilot these programs. Oh, let's go out there and get a bunch of solar panels. Let's subsidize that. And then they come out and say, look, solar's cheap. And their subsidies are the government's actually kicking in money, not just giving them tax reductions. Okay, there's a difference between the two, everybody. Oh, and then all of a sudden you got a couple million people with solar panels on their roof. We're gonna have to up the rates on you too, buddy, because we can't, like, as it turns out, you can't just give a subsidy to everybody. Eventually somebody's got to pay for it. And so mass scale rollouts of renewable regeneration projects, that if one of their arguments is, ooh, you could save so much money over the life of this thing, blah, really? Until everybody has it and the government says, oh, we're going to have to up the rates on you too. Gee, big freaking surprise.
Yeah, we're being sold a green pipe dream at this point. And
yeah, exactly. And electricity is meant to move, everybody, okay? When too much electric potential builds up and it needs to move, you have things like lightning bolts. Electricity meant to move, does not want to hang out and stay still. And so supplying electricity is a constant dance of what's the demand versus what are we generating. You can't just shove all these extra volts and all this extra current in, and the electricity's hanging out in the ether just waiting for somebody to suck it up. You have to constantly balance it. So when you have systems like solar farms and wind farms, some of the day they're generating more, some of the day they're not generating at all. Some of the month they're generating more, some of the month they're not. So it's up, down, up, down, up, down. So you're constantly doing this balance game between the things that are intermittent, green quote unquote projects, up, down, up, down, up, down. They're reliable to be unreliable and intermittent, I can tell you that. And you're constantly trying to balance that out with your baseload generation capacity. I mean, anybody who's driven a car in their life understands the difference between city miles and highway miles. Oh, highway miles are great because you're just coasting, you're not hitting the brakes and the gas pedal all the time if you're on actual open interstate. But when you're in the city or in clogged areas, it's stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. It's hard on the whole system, right? Up, down, up, down, up, down. Do you think a massive power generation facility is immune to the same realities of mechanics and physics? No. If you introduce things that create the need for it to constantly up, down, up, down, up, down, and you roll them out too fast, especially, you create more stress on the system inherently.
Yeah, because that natural gas-fired stuff was constant, or they knew what would be expected of it, and it was easy to adjust. That's not the up, down, but again, you have to balance that out. So I'm excited to see what they do with their electrical grid, but at this point, it's a pretty bleak outlook from what I can see.
Yeah, and again, if used as supplements and identified as such, supplemental property or supplemental energy, okay, supplemental electricity, there's nothing wrong with it. But when you're trying to basically clone the electrical generation capacity of the coal and the gas and the nuclear plants, you're trying to literally get a megawatt of solar and or wind, essentially, for every megawatt of coal fire or gas that you have. You've just created a massive redundancy in the system,
Mm-hmm.
and you're creating all these other follow-on effects. So, I mean, look, again, I think, we're wrapping up here. It's been a good, nice 35 minutes, almost 36.
It's a good one.
Yeah, so we'll just, let our we'll let our audience, we'll let our audience just go on and digest this however they want, and we'll be back next week.
Like Anthony said, we'll be right back, but if you end up missing us before then, go to rarepetro.com. We've got plenty of other content. I do Monday Madness, which is another sort of news outlook, and we look at statistics. We've got the monthly basin breakdown. We've got something for everybody. So again, that's www.rarepetro.com. And if you'd like to say anything about this show, or if you want us to bring something up next episode, you can always email us at podcast, P-O-D-C-A-S-T, at rarepetro.com. But that is the end of this episode, so thank you for joining us, and until we see you next time, take care, everybody.
Thanks, Tavis.